Welcome to The Ledge. My name is Chris Harper, and I'll be your host every week. Every Tuesday, I will interview an artist, developer, or creative mind from the Web3 space. I'll be getting up close and personal with my guests as we explore the emerging crypto art and NFT scene. It is my feeling, along with many others, that we are in a digital renaissance. The emergence of blockchain technology has revolutionized the way we look at ownership, provenance, and digital assets. It is my goal as your host to help shed light on these complex subjects, and even more so, the individuals behind it all who are carving out their place in history here on the ledge of Web3. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Ledge. I'm excited to be at Beeple Studios today with Mike Winkelmann, Beeple himself.
There we are.
Thank you so much for coming on here and decided to talk to me today.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've been to 3 of your events here at your studio. I was curious to know what your perspective on the grand opening was. How do you feel things are going?
Good. I think it's been fun to finally be able to show the people this space, just because it's been so long working on it, and we've been trying to keep it under wraps. I know there's a lot of building in public, but to be honest, that's never sort of what I've done. I've always wanted to have people experience it a certain way with this finished kind of product. And so that's where it's it's definitely cool to be able to see how people react to this stuff, and very interesting just to see their sort of takeaways from it.
Yeah, I think for people that haven't been here, it's hard to describe this place, but you have sort of a museum space, which has got a lot of your works, physical pieces, your everydays on that huge wall of everydays. And then there's this experiential space, which is just covered in digital screens, which is where we're sitting now.
Yep.
How did you envision this? Where did this morph from?
So this is honestly pretty much exactly how we envisioned it when we moved into the space. We were okay, this side's going to be this experiential thing, and we're going to wrap all the columns with TVs, and that side will be a museum. And so it's pretty much exactly how,
right.
How we sort of pictured things.
What was your perspective on the grand opening? I was here for that. I was really fortunate to be here. It was kind of a who's who of digital artists. I mean, there were, I heard the private airport was full of planes.
Yeah.
From people all over the world flew in to come to this party. I mean, it was quite an event.
Yeah, it was definitely crazy to see. There was a couple dollar bills there. There was a number of billionaires, and it was just crazy to see, this sort of mix of people from the kind of more degen world and people who are on the board of the MoMA, in this same space experiencing this sort of new thing. But I think, to me, that's something that's really missing from digital art as a whole, because it's this singular sort of experience instead of this sort of communal experience that people can all sort of enjoy at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I think having a space where you can bring together all these different kinds of groups, and that's something we hope to sort of do more, is bring together different communities that maybe wouldn't sort of fit together as much.
To a lot of us that were in attendance, and people that I was with, people that I talked to that were here, other artists, a lot of us felt that it was a very pivotal moment in maybe art history in general. Do you feel that? Is that weigh on you at all?
I mean, it's one of these things where it's who knows, but it felt good to sort of kind of finally have this be out in the open. And it's tough, because I think there's a lot of things that people are sort of touting as moments in art history.
Sure.
And to be honest, nobody knows. We'll see when time sort of sorts things out, what are the interesting, truly new, innovative ideas, and what is sort of that wasn't that sort of new or interesting.
I don't think anyone can argue that your historic Christie sale was a pretty momentous event in art history. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that one I think is going to be tough to argue. That one I think is going to be like pretty sort of like tough to like, you know, sort of argue that was not the thing.
Sure. And from my perspective, and I think a lot of people's perspective, that maybe puts you as like a central figure in this like digital art movement.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's sort of, that obviously caught everybody's attention.
Yeah.
And sort of, you know, was this sort of like landmark moment that opened it up to everybody. And so I think it's you know, that was definitely a moment that I think, looking back, a lot of people will sort of like point to, and then seeing what sprang from that, you know, 2 months later, the Bored Ape Yacht Club sort of like came out and sort of things like that. So I think, it was definitely a moment that I think awakened people to this movement that was going on for like a very long time.
Yeah. Were you aware of it for a long time? When did you become aware of?
I only became aware of NFTs like 4 months before that.
Wow.
And so it's definitely something that, you know, I think it happened very fast.
Yeah.
And really was this sort of, I don't know, watershed moment that I think, I think I did not see coming.
Right.
And sort of, I could not have sort of like predicted. And so I think it's, just a very, there was all these communities of sort of like digital artists making this stuff, but it was just not looked at in that light of being sort of like, you know, real sort of like actual art.
Yeah.
And so I think it was this sort of culmination of these communities and these artists that already existed.
Right.
It's just sort of changing how we kind of like viewed it. And I also didn't sort of like view it in that light as well. I didn't. I always felt that what I was making was art, but I didn't realize what separated it from the rest of the art world was the ability to collect it in this meaningful way. So then once that came along, then things got crazy.
For sure. I always ask everyone this same question, and I'm curious what your answer will be. Do you remember the first thing in your life, as far back as you can remember, that you created that you could point to and call art?
That is a good question. Not really specifically. I mean, I remember drawing a lot as a kid. And then sort of when I got a computer, that was a big inflection moment that I think sort of changed things, and immediately it became like, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing that really I'm like drawn to and really sort of like want to, you know, sort of create things with. So I think that getting a computer for the first time was probably a sort of like bigger inflection moment than, you know, sort of like drawing on my own. And then I think in sort of like high school and middle school, I think music was a lot more of a sort of like driver, and that it showed me that one person with a computer, you know, could make something sort of that everybody saw and like affected. And so I saw this as kind of like an equalizer, that like really sort of, anybody could take this tool, and what can you do with that tool that sort of, I saw as being a sort of like big moment. And you've seen that, across the board with certain people. What did Mark Zuckerberg do with the computer?
Yeah.
Well, that changed a lot of things. And so I think, to me, it was very evident that this was an insanely powerful tool that was going to like change the world. This is, like 1992, well before the internet.
What do you think about the evolution of AI now? And is that something that you're playing with?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've played with, and we've got a couple pieces in the sort of like in the gallery here that use AI. I think it's very interesting, and I think the conversations around it are very they're not very nuanced, and they're not thinking into the future of what this is going to be and how ubiquitous it will be in sort of like all different technologies.
Right.
And I think it's something where people, it's like either it is AI or it's not AI. And like there's a bunch of artists who are sort of like, this is AI, I don't like it. And it's sort of like, no, it's going to be like a lot more gray than that.
Sure.
Just recently there was a big dust up over these sort of like Secret Invasion titles that came out that for a new Marvel show that use AI. And I think to me, it seems a little silly because it's sort of like, this is just AI. And it's like, no, it's a tool. Obviously, somebody art directed these things. Right. Each shot in the thing is telling a story.
Right.
You might not like that they use this tool to tell the story, but this wasn't just like AI where you typed in Marvel titles and it just put it out. It's like, no. And there's like a credit of like 8 people that worked on it. So it's sort of like people acting like this tool is either just like, it's just the computer putting out things and it's eliminated humans. And it's like, no, it's going to empower humans to do more. And again, I look at like photography. When photography came out, it was like, oh my God, this is going to like change everything and put painters and put all these people, blah, blah, blah. Right. And it's sort of like, it didn't do that. And everybody takes photos, but they don't consider themselves a photographer. And that's how this tool will be. Everybody will use AI. They will not suddenly consider themselves an artist. There will be people who take this tool and are able to get more out of it than the average person. And those people will be considered sort of artists. And that's how it's always been. And there's going to be more tools like this that come out.
Sure. What do you feel is the state of the current digital art movement, the NFT world, crypto, Twitter, all of that? How do you see things going right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of different sort of layers there to unpack.
You're a pretty vocal voice in the crypto Twitter world, and you seem to like move the needle on like the sentiment of things a lot of times with your posts.
Yeah, I think it's something where it's very right now very splintered, and I think because things are down, it's very I don't know, people are just in a bad place, and so everybody's picking at each other. And I think you're going to see more of a sort of like even more sort of like nuance in how people view this stuff. And I think you're going to see people look at the art side of it versus the PFP side very differently. And I think you're already starting to see that, but I think it will become even more sort of like apparent. And so, and I think it will not all move in the same direction. Like right now, all NFTs are sort of like lumped together, and it's sort of like Bored Ape going down affects my stuff. And it's sort of like, no, it doesn't really have like that much to do with it. And so, I think it's tough to sort of like put too many sort of like generalities on it, because I mean, we just saw a big sale with the Goose and the 3AC collection.
That was massive.
But at the same time,
right,
other things are not doing good.
Sure.
And so I think this was inevitable. I was the dude who 3 days after the sale was saying this was a bubble. It just took a lot longer to sort of like, it didn't burst. It just is deflating.
Slowly deflated.
Yeah, and I think, I think people are going to need to sort of like come to more of like a baseline with this stuff that I think is more in line with reality and in line with other asset classes. And I think that's healthy, and I think it's going to get rid of a lot of garbage that was way, way overvalued.
You have a pretty hardcore group of collectors. How do you foster, maintain relationships with your collectors? What do you do?
Yeah, it's definitely something where I feel like I could do better, to be honest. But I think it's sort of like building a community of people who sort of truly believe in this stuff and are in it for the long term. I think that's what people need to do, because so much of it was people kind of, I hate to say it, LARPing as our collectors.
Sure.
And then as soon as the money went away, it was like, oh yeah, okay, actually now that I think about it, I don't give any fuck about this. And they convinced themselves that it was like, this is super interesting to me. And it's like, well, it was really only interesting because of the money.
Right.
And I think you're going to see those people exit the space. And to be honest, I don't think they're ever going to come back, because I think as soon as the next shiny new crypto thing comes out, they're going to run to that, because for 90% of their life, they didn't give any fuck about art. And they really only started to give a fuck about art as soon as money was involved. And so it's like, were you interested in the art, or were you just interested in the money? And so I think we'll see who the people are that were actually interested and here for the art. And unfortunately, I still think it is a fraction of the existing people who hold NFTs right now.
So you think we're going to see more people leaving the space? You feel like that's happening?
I unfortunately do, because I still think a lot of people's interest in this was entirely predicated on money. And so I still don't think we've gotten all of those people out yet, to be honest.
I had a conversation with you at one of your events where you said to me that you were intentionally keeping your supply low, or you weren't putting out a lot of stuff. Like you were doing that very intentionally. Can you talk about your thinking behind that?
Yeah, I think it's one of these things where I'm, again, 20 years into this career already, which is not the case for a lot of other people. They just started this 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Right.
And so they don't have as much of a sort of legacy and sort of history and reputation to sort of like uphold, and they're not thinking in a longer time frame because they've only been doing this a few years.
Right.
And so to me, it's sort of like, okay, how many pieces do I want out over the next 30 years of my sort of like career? And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who put out 30 years worth of supply in 2 years. And it just is not matching the demand. And as soon as you have more supply than demand, number go down.
Right.
That's it.
Sure.
And I this is something I will very much sort of credit the people from the traditional art world were advising me, don't oversupply, because once it's out there, you can't take it back. And that's what I think people don't really realize. And they think, oh, well, come up with some burn mechanic or blah, blah, blah. You're not burning it. You're not removing supply. You're just transferring it to a different asset. And it needs to have just as much or more value in that new asset as the old one.
Sure.
And so that there's no magic trick to getting out of the supply. You have to come up with something even better that you're then transferring the supply to. And so that's something we've been very careful not to do, because it's just there's no going back from it.
What are you working on?
That's a good question.
What are you guys doing here at Beeple
What aren't
Studios?
we working on? Yeah, we've got a number of sort of like physical pieces that we're working on. We've got a number of things with AI.
When you say physical pieces, are you talking about those boxes?
The boxes like Human One.
What do you call this?
So those we are calling kinetic sculptures.
Kinetic sculpture.
It's just this sort of like sculpture that is moving, but also has digital content that sort of like changes.
Yeah.
And to me, I think there's a lot of sort of like room to play in that space that I think is something that really helps mentally connect the dots for people in the traditional art world.
Got it.
It's very easy for them to look at an NFT and be like, no, bullshit. But when they see this, it's meeting them halfway, and it's using a design language that is more... it's using a visual language that they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that has been really instrumental in helping people sort of like see that it's like, wait, this is like any other piece of art, and this is sort of like very much a, sort of just another way to express,
sure,
artistic ideas.
They're incredible. I've obviously I've seen them in your gallery here. They're stunning. I guess it's a lot of technology and coding and art that all goes into the building one of those.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a few pieces there. There's a few pieces.
Does one of those physical pieces, do they come with a corresponding NFT? Is that how that works? Or?
Yeah, they all have sort of like NFTs attached to them. And so that's a way that even when the physical sort of like piece is not being displayed, the NFT is still able to sort of like be displayed.
And my understanding is that the NFT could change and the physical content of the display on those boxes could change with it. Is that how that works? Yeah.
Both of them sort of like can change, and sort of like Human One is able to sort of like change, and then the physical piece can change as well. And I think to me that's very interesting too, because the piece can change throughout the exhibition. And I think that's something that we've not really seen before in sort of like a museum space. Something is there, and then like that's it. It's sort of like set in stone. And being able to change the piece and have it evolve over time is something that I think is really exciting, and something I think you're going to see a lot more of in the future. I think this idea of art being dynamic and changing, I think is really something that there's a lot of different ways to kind of like explore.
And I mean, I guess I see you as one of the pioneers of that type of art. I'm not aware of anybody else that's doing that. Are you? Do you know of any other artists that are doing anything similar to that?
Not really with like physical pieces. I think we've seen some sort of like dynamic sort of like pieces with NFTs, but even that I think we're at the very, very sort of like beginning of. I think we'll look back at these pieces that were sort of like static as really sort of like early. Again, like I look at like a lot of websites, like we look at websites as being very dynamic now, and things can change, and this is pulling information from this and That's not how they were at first. It was just an HTML page that was just completely static. Here's the images on it. Here's the text. Nothing will ever change. It's not pulling information from anywhere. And so that's where I think we're just at the absolute beginning of what can be done with this technology.
Mike, you have a great team here at Beeple Studios. I was going to ask you, are you hiring? Do you do hiring here? And if so, for what?
That you'd have to ask Scott. He is very much the one running the team here.
I'm sure there's people out there that are...
I am just the idiot who shows up every day and tries to not get us all canceled.
My last question for you, and I wanted to know why you chose Charleston, and since you're here, what can local residents and artists look forward to you? And, what are we looking forward to as having you here in Charleston?
Yeah, I think it's something where, my brother, so why I chose Charleston is I was living in Wisconsin, and my brother was here down at Boeing. And so we came down here just to sort of like be close to him like 5-6 years ago. And then obviously when this NFT thing exploded, that's when we started sort of like working together. And so, yeah, I think we're just at the beginning of sort of being able to get, people from the community sort of like engaged in this. But yeah, we're definitely going to be doing more things like that to sort of really kind of engage and sort of,
Nice.
educate people about sort of like digital art and bring people together to experience this sort of like new medium in a way that you just can't when you're sitting alone, looking at your phone.
You have a lot of your family around you. I know your brother's here helping you. One of my friends told me that when you had the last event, the guy helping him park was your dad. Your dad was the parking lot.
My whole family. My wife has an office here.
That's awesome.
My mom, my dad. And so it's definitely something where, it's cool to have everybody sort of like be a part of this. And like they've been insanely supportive my entire career. So
right on.
Yeah, it's really fun to have them be able to like experience this firsthand.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that's all my questions, unless you have any alpha you want to let us have before we get off.
I have no alpha, unfortunately. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Mike, for your time and having me here in your space. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that, man.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Ledge. If you like this show, please listen and rate and review me in the podcast platform of your choice. 5 stars and a little review goes a long way to helping me be more visible on podcast platforms. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you again next week.